Well, hello, Dr. Doni, and welcome to the Rebuilding My Health Radio podcast. I'm excited to talk with you today about your personal health experience and all the wisdom that you bring as a practitioner.
Thank you, Casey. I'm excited too.
Yeah, well, good. Well, let's just dive in. First of all, I know so many people who have migraines. It's surprising how common it is when you really start talking with people. And it seems like such a hard puzzle to solve. So, kind of take us back in your own journey when migraines started for you and how they impacted your life.
It's true. I think more people have migraines than we realize because a lot of times people with migraines don't talk about it. They don't say anything. I know for
Mhm.
all the years I was getting migraines, I really didn't tell very many people that I was in pain. And so, if anyone listening, may relate to that too. It's a condition that a lot of times we suffer in silence with the migraine pain, and to some degree, I think it's for me, it was almost like hoping the next one wasn't going to happen. Like if I wouldn't talk about it, maybe it's not going to happen. But then it did happen, and they happened over and over and over. I mean, I'm my migraine started even before I became a naturopathic doctor. The migraine started, I think, when I was in my 20s. And like, after college, somewhere in there, I started to get the migraines. At that point, a lot of them were related to my menstrual cycle, but then they started just happening
Mm.
all different times of the month. Um, and so while I was in naturopathic medical school, I was, because part of the training as a naturopathic doctor is you're trying out all the different treatments. So I tried every kind of diet, every kind of detox, every kind of physical medicine therapy, cold water therapy, acupuncture. Like I was herbs. I was a student of every possible thing, and I was still getting sick. In fact, sometimes I even was more
Yeah.
sick after some of those treatments. I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, now I feel worse. So I was like, I learned a lot in the process. And then I came out of naturopathic medical school still having migraines. In fact, then I moved to Manhattan right after 9/11. So I was busy growing my practice while also going through pregnancy and postpartum and still having migraines. And it was, I think maybe they even were even worse because my stress level continued from, it just changed from being medical school stress into being a practicing doctor and parent stress.
Mhm.
And I was getting migraines, at least one every 2 weeks for years. And the thing about the migraines that I had is they were what I call vomiting migraines. So
Mhm.
when the migraine would get to a certain severity, it would cause me to start vomiting, and I might be vomiting for at least 24 hours. And so not only was I in pain, I couldn't just swallow something for pain because I was vomiting. So it was pretty much like
Mhm.
when the migraine started, I just knew I was going to be pretty much non-functional for at least 24 to 48 hours. And usually then there's this migraine hangover that happens, so it would be days of
Yeah.
recovering.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yes. It's really debilitating. I mean, I'm sure you had patients that were scheduled to see you, and then this happens and it's not expected. And yeah, and you
Yeah,
just
you
have
just
to
never know. You never
wait.
know when you're gonna wake up one day, and I could kind of tell when I wake up in the morning. I'd be like, "Uh-oh, this feels like it's gonna be one of those days." And then I would just start telling my assistant, "We better start rescheduling people because." And sometimes I would try to see patients as much as I could while still having a migraine, and that's extra challenging because when you have that kind of head pain, it's hard to think. And it's hard
Mhm.
to, follow through on things. So even if I did continue seeing patients, it just was extra difficult to be efficient about that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And then with the vomiting, I mean, it's just, I can imagine it was probably nearly impossible to just maintain your usual work day. Um, so you had tried so many different things over the years, and I'm sure you were like a dog on the trail of like trying to
I was.
find like what is the missing piece here with all of this. So, what ultimately kind of led you to figure this out?
Well, and I had some version of imposter syndrome. I thought as a naturopathic doctor, I'm not supposed to be getting migraines. So
Hmm.
I thought, why can't I solve this? I'm helping people with solving all different other health issues, and yet I wasn't able to fully solve my migraines until more recently, and so I was a lot of times again in silence, kind of researching and trying things, and in that way, I say that the migraines really drove me to learn about so many approaches that then have helped so many people with other health issues too. I researched diets, for example. I was trying to figure out what foods do I need to avoid. And so I became an expert in food sensitivities and gluten sensitivity in particular. This is way back when we
Hmm.
first started hearing about gluten. Back in, it was, probably like 2000, 2002. I was researching a gluten-free diet and trying that out on myself, and then creating a kind of a cleanse as a gluten-free, dairy-free cleanse, and that made some difference
Hmm.
for the migraines. Like I would always say, like a percentage, maybe avoiding gluten, that I could probably say decrease the percentage or the likelihood of a migraine by like 50%, which was significant at that point
Wow.
in time. It's like if I could do anything that would reduce them even 20%, it would be worth it, because you're like, just
Yeah.
how do I get out of this pain and this cycle? And so I still mostly am gluten free in my diet now. And so gluten free made it, was a huge piece of the puzzle. I also then researched leaky gut and how to heal the gut and imbalance the gut
Mhm.
bacteria and everything in between, from FODMAP diets to AIP diets, and researching all of that between diets and gut healing for many years. And then I also started researching around that same time. I was completing research on cortisol levels and how stress affects our cortisol and how stress affects our neurotransmitter levels like serotonin and GABA and dopamine, which can all be interrelated to risk of migraines as well. And
Mhm.
so I was measuring my levels as well as patient levels of, thinking, okay, if stress is playing a role in the likelihood of migraines, I need to understand how the stress is affecting my stress hormones, which is cortisol and adrenaline and the neurotransmitters. And then how can I get them back to optimal? How can I get my cortisol to optimal, my adrenaline to optimal as a way to
Mhm.
prevent the migraine? So I researched that and I started speaking at professional conferences and writing about how to really, that comes down to the adrenal glands, because when we're under stress,
Mhm.
it's our adrenal glands that are our stress responders that make cortisol and adrenaline. So it's about how to optimally recover from stress and help your adrenals recover from stress. And so I did so much research and work there, and it just continued.
Cool.
I mean, I ended up writing. I wrote my first book about stress
Mhm.
recovery and the adrenal glands. Then I was researching MTHFR because that became
Mhm.
kind of like more popular as a
Mhm.
genetic variation that's associated with migraines. And I
Mhm.
have two MTHFR gene variations. So as I was like, oh, how much of the migraines is because of not fully addressing MTHFR and methylation. And so I went through a
Mhm.
whole process of training and researching and developing a protocol to help people with MTHFR and methylation issues, and based on what I learned for myself. And so that each step of the way it would help a percentage, but I was still getting the migraine. So I would be like, okay, how many more steps do I have to take before I completely solve these migraines? And I did get there, but we could, tell me if you have questions about that much so far.
Yeah, yeah. I do have a couple of questions. So fascinating. So when you were doing your research, what did you find in terms of the connection between stress and migraines?
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, we know, like, we can kind of think like, okay, if I'm under a lot of stress, we might be more likely to have any kind of headache, even just a stress, a
Mhm.
tension headache, or, muscle tightness related headache. And yet I wanted to go much more specific than just generally looking at stress. I wanted to get much closer look at exactly how is it that stress causes an increase in migraines, let alone a bunch of other health issues, right? Ultimately,
Mhm.
more than 90%, I would probably say more than 95% of our health issues in general are ultimately related to our stress exposure. And what I would say, and what I learned from all this research, is that it's a combination of our stress exposure and really our lack of stress recovery. And so it
Mhm.
forced me to look at how am I allowing myself to recover from stress? I've been under this stress in school and and running my practice and raising my daughter and all the other things that come up in life. And am I, how do I learn how to give myself time off, to plan my schedule in a way where I get breaks, where I can spend some time in nature, where I can, and really
Mhm.
ultimately the migraines kind of forced me to. Like, I think that sometimes if a person doesn't have that level of pain, they might go on their lives without having to choose certain things. But I really had to, for example, get a massage or physical therapy or acupuncture every week. Like,
Mhm.
if I knew that if I didn't do some form of physical therapy, massage, or acupuncture every week, that I was going to have a migraine sooner, more often. And so
Wow.
I was forced to bring those kind of like self-care activities into my schedule. Like, I had to prioritize it. And then, but then, even then, I needed to prioritize mindfulness and meditation. And so I decided to sign myself up for a mindfulness course. So I'm like, okay, I'm going
Wow.
to make this part of my schedule. And so the more that I re- decided to research stress recovery, the more that also helped, and still to this
Mhm.
day, like, I'm like, okay, that time, my stress recovery time is very protected, because I know if I push myself too hard, I'm gonna get a migraine again. And actually, like, there was a day I remember I was laying there, like, let's say in my bed, just feeling awful, thinking to myself, oh my gosh, am I laying here in pain as my body's way of forcing me to take a break?
Mhm.
And I said to myself, well, what if I just create more breaks in my schedule, and maybe then the migraines will be less often. I'd rather take a break and feel good than
Mhm.
push myself to the point of needing a break because I'm in pain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, proactively take those breaks instead of your body forcing you to take the breaks. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, that is really interesting. And then you also mentioned MTHFR, which some folks may not be that familiar with. Can you explain that a little bit more, and kind of its relationship and testing as well, how someone would maybe test to find out if that could be an issue?
So here's where, I'm talking about how, like, stress or health issues and migraines in particular, a lot of times is related to our stress exposure. But it's always this, this endless dilemma of how much of our health is determined by our genetics. And there is a percentage that's influenced by our genetics. It's usually less than 10% of an influence on our health. But there are these genetic variations that, like MTHFR, that can influence. I would say it's really influencing the effectiveness of how our body uses our B vitamins, is what methylation in the body is. How well are we using our B
Mhm.
vitamins? It's not even do we have enough or how much B vitamins do we have. It's really, is our body able to use them efficiently for good stuff? Like, our B vitamins are used for making neurotransmitters and breaking down neurotransmitters, let alone making new healthy cells and protecting our cells and protecting our DNA. So the way our bodies use our B vitamins is so important, and it's very much affected by our stress exposure. So here again,
Mhm.
methylation and MTHFR comes right back to this piece of stress recovery. One of the best way, if you know you have an MTHFR gene variation, one of the best ways to address it is to address your stress and get your cortisol and adrenaline back on track and get your schedule, get some recovery activities in your schedule. But to answer your question, MTHFR specifically is a gene that has to do with activating folate. It actually turns folic acid into activated form of folate. Folate is vitamin B9. So if we have and more than 40% of us have a genetic variation of MTHFR, so that's quite a lot of us. If more than 40% of us have some decreased ability to use folic acid. So what I encourage listeners to do is look at your your B complex, anywhere you have B vitamins, and if it says folic acid, replace it with a product that has methylfolate, which is the active form, because if you have even one genetic variation, let alone two genetic variations on MTHFR, it means you have a decreased ability to use folic acid. So you're taking something that you're not even fully able to use. You might as well switch to methylfolate, which our bodies are able to use. And then that methylfolate gets together with the other B vitamins to do all the good stuff in our bodies. But if we have a high stress level, or if we have a high toxin level, which I also consider environmental toxins as a stress, it has the same effect on our bodies as emotional stress, and toxins as a stress have the same effect on our bodies, and that is one of them is to slow down our use of B vitamins. So we have to be always like, hey, if there's a methylation issue, if you're not using your B vitamins effectively, we need to be helping you to recover from stress, which to me means, again, getting your cortisol and adrenaline in balance, creating self-care recovery time. And we need to help get rid of toxins if they're in your body, because then all of a sudden your body starts using B vitamins better again. And we know B vitamins, there's a ton of research just on B vitamins related to migraines. Like riboflavin, for example, is one of the main nutrients that's been shown to help with migraines. Riboflavin is really essential for the methylation pathway for the use of B vitamins. So if riboflavin's helping, it's likely because it's helping with methylation. Same with magnesium, by the way. Magnesium is also a common nutrient that's helpful for migraines in research and clinically. Why magnesium? Well, magnesium is a nutrient that most all of us are deficient in. We don't get enough of it in our diet. We use it up too much because magnesium is used in so many biochemical pathways, including the metabolism of adrenaline. So if we're under stress, we're making more adrenaline, we're using up our magnesium, we're going to be more likely to get any kind of headache or muscle cramp, let alone a migraine.
Right. Absolutely. That is super interesting. All of it.
I think so too. It's like you see how much I learned from, I learned so much from having migraines because of just constantly saying to myself, there has to be a reason why the migraine's happening. And it's got to be interconnected with everything else going on in my body, right? So if I have gluten sensitivity and leaky gut, that's got to be related to why I'm getting migraines. Let me solve that. Okay, I have MTHFR gene variations. Okay, let me solve that, and that should help with the migraines. Okay, then the next thing was I have another genetic variation that's hypermobility, which has to do with the way collagen is made in the body, and it has to do with joint mobility. And some of us, I'm actually not sure the percentage, but I think it's a higher percentage than we would think, because a lot of people don't realize they have joint hypermobility, or what's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome sometimes. But there's there's a whole spectrum of joint hypermobility where just people's joints don't stay exactly in the healthiest joint position and are more easily injured, or more likely to shift out of that position. And of course, if the joint goes out of position, it's going to cause muscle spasms and that can lead to headaches and migraines in particular. So I also had that going for me in terms of likelihood for migraines. And so I finally diagnosed myself with all of these things. I diagnosed myself with the gluten sensitivity, the MTHFR, and then I diagnosed myself with hypermobility, and realized no wonder I need like physical therapy and myofascial therapy, and I was constantly having to work on helping my joints and muscles recover and get back into position. And so if anyone listening has like a lot of muscle tension, if your neck is kind of always going out of place, if your shoulders are always tight, if it feels like you go to work out and then before you know it, you're getting injured again, likely you have some degree of hypermobility, and it's learning how to live in a body that has hypermobility. And that was huge actually when I figured that out. That took a whole nother chunk out of the frequency of migraines, because I started realizing not only do I need to be constantly getting recovery for my muscles and joints, but I also need to, like
Mhm.
right now I'm at a standing desk, for example. I can't sit all day, because if I'm sitting all day at a desk, which is what I did for
Mhm.
many, many years, or I was sitting in my car commuting for many, many years, driving all around,
Mhm.
I was commuting
Yeah.
hours and hours a day. And that's a sitting position that's terrible for someone who has hypermobility. So I was like, I need to have a standing desk. So now I stand all day. I stand,
Wow.
because from a standing position, I can keep my joints in place, I can move around, I can
Mhm.
have a healthy posture for my body and my neck that I can't have when I'm in a seated position.
Right. Yeah. Um, so fascinating. So yeah, so you kind of are I guess finding more pieces of the puzzle. There's the gluten diet part, the MTHR part, the stress connection, the hypermobility connection. And so with each of these pieces, it sounds like your migraines were decreasing in frequency and severity. Fair to
Yeah, but
say?
there was a couple other things that really helped me turn the corner. One was
Hmm.
I started talking about them. Like
Hmm.
it's so interesting to me to look back at that, but I just decided one day, you know what, why am I not talking about this? Why am I not even telling my friends and my colleagues that I'm experiencing severe migraines? I needed to push myself emotionally to feel
Hmm.
confident enough to talk about it. And so amazingly, when I even just started talking to a couple friends and colleagues, and it was interesting because, of course, when I say this to them, I say, I'm getting these migraines that cause me to vomit for 24 hours. They were like, oh, okay. Like they didn't judge me. They
Right.
didn't even necessarily try to help me. They just listened. And it was
Hmm.
amazing to me how just me verbalizing it made a difference. And I started writing it. I started
Yeah.
including that in my bio. Before, if you look back at my bio 10 years ago, I never mentioned the migraines.
Hmm.
So it was
Right.
like just kind of, there's something I really believe about sharing our experience that's transformative,
Hmm.
because I have to say that that made a significant drop in the migraines for me, just not feeling alone with it anymore. And I mean,
Hmm.
and believe me, I tried every kind of herb and homeopathic remedy. I've taken so many homeopathic remedies over the years. I've tried so many
Yeah.
things. The other thing that really made a difference is I finally ran a toxin panel on myself. There's actually urine tests for environmental
Hmm.
toxins. And I was running these on my patients, but I hadn't run one on myself. And so I'm like, okay, I've got to invest in this urine toxin panel, because I'm thinking I'm really careful. I already was not, I was like, I had non-toxic personal care products and non-toxic cleaning products in my home. And
Yeah.
I had a water filter, really good water filter, and air filters in my home. And like all the things we were cleaning, I cleaned my house and dust regularly. And I mean, you name it. I barely drank any alcohol. I could probably say no alcohol, no smoking, no, so you would think my
Hmm.
toxic load would be so, so low,
Yeah.
just because I had already had such awareness for it for all those years. Well, when I ran this toxin panel on myself, I figured out that I was really high in flame retardants. So I was getting exposed to flame retardants from my furniture. I did not yet have
Yeah.
organic, I did not have an organic mattress, and I did not have an organic couch. So when I was
Yeah.
not standing, I was going to bed to lay on a toxic mattress. Or if I was on the
Yeah.
couch, I was sitting on a toxic couch. So I was like, I'm not sleeping on that mattress ever again. And it was
Yeah.
just, like one of these memory foam mattresses. And I had gone through so many pillows, by the way. I think anyone with migraines probably gets it. Like, we try every kind of mattress, every kind of pillow, because you're thinking, I need to help myself stay away from a migraine. But of course, a lot of those mattresses and pillows had memory foam, which memory foam
Mhm.
contains flame retardants.
Yeah.
So I was like,
It's
okay, that's out.
yeah.
So I got an organic mattress, I got an organic couch, I got the flame retardant toxins out of my body, and that
Mhm.
also made a huge difference in the migraines. Like, I
Wow.
couldn't believe the difference even within a few weeks of not sleeping on that mattress.
Wow. Wild. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you wouldn't think,
That
right?
that one thing can make such a big difference. Yeah. But you're laying on it for like a third of your life, basically.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time in our beds actually, and even when I had a
Yeah.
migraine, I was in the bed more. So it was
Mhm.
like
Yeah, right, right. You thinking back, you're like, oh, I was like laying in, one of the causes. Yeah, so interesting. And I read this in your story, recently, and I went back and looked at my toxin panel, and I had previously tested super high for flame retardants as well. And then did some detoxing and brought it down. I think I was in like the 90th percentile for flame retardant, so it's
I know, right? It's
crazy.
surprising.
Yeah, yeah. With mattresses, my understanding is that it's required, but there are some natural kind of non-toxic flame retardants. If you look around out there, there are beds that have kind of the natural flame retardants in there. So
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so those were,
so
and even then I've found some other things since then too that I can talk about, but those were some of the
mhm,
key game
mhm,
changers for me. But it's important to know that, like, it wasn't just one thing, it was, I
mhm,
had to just
yeah.
stay after it and look at it from every angle. Like, okay, it's stress, but a lot of times we just think, well, what can I do with my stress? But I just kept looking, well, is there a food that's a stress, and how did that food affect me? And
Mhm,
is there a toxin that's a stress, and how do I get rid of
mhm,
that, and how do I optimize my stress recovery every single day? Even if my posture and my commuting is a stress, what can I do to shift my day-to-day activities so that that doesn't isn't a stress on my body? And so I just
mhm,
encouraging people to know, like, whenever you're solving any health issue, it can be a matter of and some people are like, oh my gosh, it feels overwhelming to do that all at once. But keep in mind, I did this over like a 20-year period. This was not even
mhm.
over 20 months. This was over 20 years of
Yeah.
little by little learning and implementing and learning and implementing and learning and implementing. And then it
Mhm,
starts finally got to the point where it was enough of all of that in order to turn off the migraines.
mhm. Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important point though, that it's probably not going to be one thing with migraines. It's probably going to be kind of a layered approach of figuring out what the triggers are for you. So ultimately, I mean, have you been able to stop your migraines or just dramatically reduce them?
Yeah, I mean, this is the funny thing about when you have a history of migraines. Like, it's almost like you don't want to jinx your record. People will say that to me too a lot of times.
Oh,
Patients are like, I don't want to jinx it because then I might get one tomorrow. But
right.
I haven't. I mean, the last migraine I had was at least 3 years ago. I mean,
Wow.
and when I was having migraines every other week, it always
Mhm,
felt like you're constantly in a stress state because you don't know when it's coming.
mhm.
And so it took me a long time
Yeah.
to get out of that, even just the stress of PTS, it's like migraine PTSD
Yeah.
or something. Like, it took me more than a year to just be like, oh, I'm maybe I'm not gonna get another migraine, like you start to, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I would say at this point, I fully don't anticipate getting a migraine. It's been
Mhm,
so long that I don't think
mhm,
about it. And occasionally I might get a little bit of neck tightness, but compared to a
mhm,
migraine, it's like 1%. And then I know exactly what I can do to get it to calm down, and it doesn't go into the full blown thing,
Mhm.
because so I know, okay, this is just a little bit of neck tightness. That's way different than
Mhm.
days of pain and vomiting.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious, like when you do feel that neck tightness, what do you do?
Hmm.
What are your strategies?
Well, definitely, I always it reminds me, okay, I need to do my daily stretches and
Mhm.
movements. I'm very careful with my, especially with hypermobility. I need to strengthen and exercise. I do Pilates every week. I'm
Mhm.
a competition level ballroom dancer. So that's the other
Oh.
thing, by the way, I added in right around the time that the migraines really reduced. I went back to dancing. And I can't say how much influence did that have. I was a dancer earlier in my life, from
Mhm.
childhood and in college, and then I wasn't dancing for like 20 years. And then I decided one day I'm signing up for a ballroom dancing class. And I went back to dancing, like now I can do like 15 different kinds of dance from salsa and mambo and so on. And so every week I'm dancing. I go to dance classes or I'm at dance performances
Mhm.
several hours a week. And so to realize I need some amount of activity and I need strength, but I can't overdo it also. So I'm always having to manage
Mhm.
how much, as even if I wanted to dance more, I have to know my limits. How much can I do
Yeah.
in a week or in a day? Um,
Mhm.
and so, those are the things that I do. Like as soon as I feel my neck tight, I'm like, okay, maybe I overdid it the day before. Maybe I need to do a little more stretching. Actually, one of my favorites is actually I use a THC topical.
Okay.
So at some point along the way, I did
Mhm.
get a medical marijuana license, and and that was, I mean, that was a good tool for me sometimes in the midst of a migraine, but not always. By the time the migraine would
Mhm.
start, it might not be enough to solve it. But what I did find has been really helpful is to use a topical THC because I can still then think and do what I
Mhm.
need to do, but the topical THC is really helpful for me for muscle tension. So I'll use that
Mhm.
like whenever I feel that neck tightness, or I just make sure I go to acupuncture. There's specific acupuncture where they do electrical stimulation on the acupuncture needles, and that's been
Mhm.
huge. Like if I do, so you have to look for an acupuncturist that specifically is trained in that or knows how to
Mhm.
do that, but that helps retrain the muscle contractions, and that's been huge to help with the muscle tightness. And that, as well as
Great.
myofascial therapy, which is a more advanced sort of
Mhm.
massage technique. So I use all of those tools to, just between stretching and posture and topical.
Mhm.
I also sometimes use topical magnesium because that helps relax muscles.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Wow.
I have a whole
Great.
toolbox of things.
You do. You do have a whole toolbox. That's fantastic. Um, so, I mean, like from your personal experience and then all of your experience working with patients, is it there a way to say like these would be the top three, maybe migraine remedies that tend to work the best for people or that are the most common? Is it really individual, pretty individual per person?
I mean, there's some things that I would say, like when I meet with someone who has migraines, I walk them through and I think through, like, here's some things that a person could start with if they're not doing already. And then I would guide people through testing. And it's somewhat
Mhm.
based on the individual, right? So we want to be always thinking, well, with this person, are the migraines associated with their menstrual cycle? In that case, maybe we need to do urine hormone panel and see where's your estrogen, where's your progesterone. Do we need to do some balancing of estrogen progesterone, which I also went through that with my body too. Earlier on in the process, I did a lot of work with balancing the female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and ovulation and all of that. Or if someone's like, well, it's not related to my menstrual cycle or ovulation, then or maybe that's part of it, then we need to look at food sensitivity. So we do a food sensitivity panel to see And there's so many food sensitivity panels out there, but there's one lab in particular that I find gives the best information, the most accurate, has helped the most patients, and that's the lab I'm
Mhm.
going to go to. So I do a food panel, and we start, that's
Mhm.
individualizing it, right? It's, yes, everybody could just decide to avoid
Mhm.
gluten, but it's better if we can see, okay, yes, gluten, but what specific foods is your immune system protecting you from, and how do we individualize your diet and start working on
Mhm.
healing leaky gut? Same with cortisol. We want to know, is your, because cortisol could be too high or too low. So we need to test and see, is your cortisol too high or too low? Is your adrenaline too high or too low? Is your serotonin and GABA too low? Like, so I guide them through step by step. How do we get the right information to individualize it most efficiently and strategically? And that's what I call my stress recovery protocol. So in the stress
Mhm.
recovery protocol, I guide people through these phases of first understanding which foods to avoid, which ones to
Mhm.
prioritize out of your diet, to how to know your cortisol and adrenaline, which is what I call your stress type, and how to address your stress type using nutrients and herbs. And then
Mhm.
we look at, does the person need to be tested for toxins or potentially mold toxins, for example? And so we start to gather all the pieces of the puzzle so that we can create a comprehensive protocol. And I think people could, I mean, the patients I work with, they solve their migraines way faster than I did because I'm able to
Yeah,
guide them more efficiently through the steps.
right. Yeah, you've got what, more than 20 years of experience with what to look for.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stones to turn over and such. Yeah, yeah. So, and do you want to talk for a minute about plant medicine
Sure.
for migraines as well?
Sure, of course. And I share all of this, including about plant medicine, in my book, The Master Stress Reset Your Health. That's my most recent book.
Mhm.
And plant medicine, I came to really at that point, the migraines were on, really had decreased. They were still there a little bit though. And I came to plant medicine especially because I was experiencing still emotional stress in my life, and I had the hypermobility had caused a joint injury in my clavicle. So I was
Oh.
looking for more options to help me with that, to solve that situation.
Mhm.
And that's when I had been researching and learning about shamanism and ayahuasca for a number of years, but it just came to a
Mhm.
point where I had this opportunity to work with a shaman then at that point. And so that was 2 years ago then that I went to Peru for the first time to work with a shaman and take ayahuasca. And the very first time that I took ayahuasca, I remember coming out of that ceremony, and I actually said this to the group. I like, that's way better than a migraine because because the thing is like with with ayahuasca, sometimes it does cause vomiting, not always, but that's one thing that
Mhm.
people often hear is if you take ayahuasca, it might cause vomiting. But the difference is
Yeah.
that with ayahuasca, you might just vomit one time. You hadn't eaten any food for the past 5 or so hours, so the only thing in your stomach is a little bit of ayahuasca. So if you vomit,
Mhm.
it's like one vomit, and it's just ayahuasca. So for me, that was way better than
Mhm.
24 hours of vomiting,
Right.
and there's no pain with ayahuasca. So I, instead of having a migraine pain, the DMT and the ayahuasca is a plant medicine that contains something called DMT. And DMT
Mhm.
is very healing to the nervous system. So I could literally feel all the nerves in my brain and my body like feeling like they were being healed. Like it's like a feeling of like,
Oh.
basically, it was like, that's what my nerves needed all this time. Every
Wow.
migraine was my nervous system saying, can you please give me some DMT? And so once I took it, I was like, oh, that's what that feeling is. And so it really gave me an appreciation for understanding what the nervous system is telling us when we get a migraine. It's really telling us. I mean, I had
Mhm.
already known it was telling me that I was stressed and I needed stress recovery, But then I was like, oh, my nerves really need some nurturing and healing. And yes, all the things, I mean, spending time in nature, taking deep breaths, getting more sleep, all of these things help our nervous system heal. But when you go into a shamanism ceremony with a medicine like ayahuasca, it's like turning up the volume on the nerve healing. It's like taking the nerve healing that we're used to, which is maybe at like 10 or 20%, and taking it to 100%. It's like, let me just
Wow.
turn up the volume on healing your nerves and your nervous system. And at first that can be quite intense, which is why it's important to be in ceremony with a shaman who's experienced to help you know what's the right dose and how to integrate your experience. But to me, ayahuasca as a plant medicine and the whole experience in a shamanic ceremony has been so healing. So I've now been in over 70 ayahuasca
Oh,
ceremonies in the past 2 years.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And so because I just see how much of a stress recovery tool that it is. And so now my most recent trip to Peru, I was training in a shaman's apprenticeship, training in the safety of being in the Amazon, first of all. So you're living in the jungle, and the safety of taking a plant medicine and how to anticipate what people might experience, and also researching the diet that's followed and the effectiveness of the plant medicine, because I feel so strongly that I really want the information to be available to people who, if a person like me is in severe pain for that many years and I
Yeah.
wasn't finding solutions. I mean, I had also tried solutions in the conventional medical realm. Medications were not helping me. I didn't want to be just taking a medication for the rest of my life. And so I was like, I will make any diet change. I will do anything I have to do to get out
Yeah.
of pain without becoming reliant on a medication. So if anyone else is in that situation where you're like, I really don't want to just be dependent on a medication, I want to solve this. I want people to know that these solutions are out there, that not only have I developed these protocols you can do from home, but also if you're drawn to experiencing plant medicine, then that's definitely something I would say is worth researching and considering, because from my experience and research, it can make a huge difference and get a lot of people out
Yeah.
of emotional and physical pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. And did you see a difference with your migraines with it, or were you kind of already like over the hump with migraines when you started with plant medicine?
They had really reduced, but what I can tell you is I have not had a migraine since I had that
Wow.
first experience with ayahuasca. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's
Yeah.
there's all these things combined, right? And I
Hmm.
definitely know that ayahuasca is anti-inflammatory, analgesic, healing for the nervous system. So it makes sense that, I mean, and not everybody has to do 70 ceremonies. You likely would just do maybe a small number of ceremonies with ayahuasca and still get a lot of benefit from it. But it's just I've done that many because it's something that I'm wanting to research and be able to teach more people about it. But yeah, I definitely think it's made a difference, because I think that at that point in time, I was still, maybe I was only getting migraines like 4 times a year, but I was still getting them. And since adding ayahuasca, I haven't had one. So it's like,
Wow.
what can you say at that point, right?
Right. Right. Well, wow, fantastic. Such an incredible story of just, your research and your determination to find the answers, and ultimately end the migraines. And I know people are going to learn a ton from your experience and your wisdom from working with all the people that you've worked with over the years. So tell listeners, more about kind of what you're doing now and how they can find and follow you.
So my website is at drdoni.com. It's just spelled out DOCTOR, and then Doni is DONI.com. It's short for Donielle, but most people call me Dr. Doni, so that's why that's the website. And I have whole bunch, hundreds of blogs, and I also have a podcast there,
Mhm.
and also my books and a bunch of different master classes. So what I've done is I do videos on each of these topic areas like MTHFR and leaky gut and so on, so that you can really understand based on what your health issue is. How do I think it through? How do I apply my protocol to that situation? Because it's what I'm ultimately a researcher. I'm ultimately like, hey, how do I create a protocol that's going to help the most people with the most health issues? And so
Right.
that's what you'll find at drdonnie.com.
Yeah, so many resources. And I have to say, your podcast, first of all, I love the title, How Humans Heal. And that is also a fantastic resource. And you've got more than 100 episodes, right?
Yeah, I
At
think
this
we're
point.
152. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
152. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. So, I really encourage everybody to check out everything that you have put out there. So much good that you've put out into the world. So, any last words of advice for folks? I know you've already given a lot, but
Yeah, I mean, where I at the moment, what I'm thinking is just again knowing like if you've been struggling with, that's what I love to help with is people who've been trying to figure something out and just not getting enough help, not getting enough help, not in the medical system or even from other practitioners, and feeling like you start to lose hope. Is this even possible to solve? And yeah, I'm the kind of person who has faced that myself and said, okay, like I'm willing to research more and try something else in order to solve this, because I truly do believe that our bodies can heal and can
Mhm.
adapt and change when we change the input we're giving. So if we're willing to change our diet and change our sleep patterns and change our daily routines and figure out which nutrients and herbs are missing for our metabolism, that can be very individualized, then we can solve a lot of health issues. And so just trying to put that out there, that if you've been searching for help and not finding it, then please come reach out to me, because I'd be happy to help you solve it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the experience and knowledge that you have is hard to compare, and especially with migraines and the whole stress part. And absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Donnie. I really appreciate you coming on, and I know this will be super insightful for folks who have migraines as well as a host of other health challenges that they are looking to solve. So many things that are applicable um, to health in general. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much
So,
for having me and for sharing this information.
yeah, definitely. Take care.